The species was known across the galaxy for the wrong reasons. Everywhere travelers went, stories of their cruelty and danger preceded them. Some said they were aggressive, others whispered that they could not be trusted. Children in distant star systems were warned never to approach them, and merchants refused to trade anything with anyone who belonged to their kind. In the eyes of the galaxy, they were feared, loathed, and unwelcome. Yet on their homeworld, life was very different from the tales told in the stars. Families lived in quiet neighborhoods with homes built from simple but strong materials. Gardens flourished outside many houses, where parents taught their children to care for plants and animals alike. Streets were filled with neighbors greeting each other warmly, sharing food, helping when someone was sick or in trouble. Life was ordinary, peaceful, and full of small joys, far removed from the cruel image projected across the galaxy. Near my case, them lived a young member of this species named Kalen. From an early age, Kalen understood the contrast between what the galaxy thought of their people and what life was truly like at home. While other children might have grown up proud of their reputation, Kalen felt a quiet sadness. He loved his home and the kindness he witnessed daily, but he could not ignore the fear and hatred directed at his kind elsewhere. Even in school, lessons included discussions of how other species viewed them. Teachers would sometimes explain that while it was important to live honorably, the universe held its prejudices and one must be careful. Kalen's parents tried to shield him from the harshness of these views, but it was impossible to escape entirely. The family often watched news broadcasts from other star systems, showing only the worst incidents involving their species, many exaggerated or taken out of context. Headlines screamed of attacks, conflicts, or supposed acts of greed. While some events were real, they represented only a tiny fraction of the everyday lives of billions of peaceful beings. Kalen noticed that the stories never showed moments of care, generosity, or bravery, and that gap in perception troubled him deeply. He spent hours observing his own community, elderly neighbors helping one another with repairs, young siblings sharing lessons and stories with children who could not attend school, friends working together to harvest food during difficult seasons. These were acts of ordinary life, simple, yet meaningful. Every small gesture contradicted the galaxy's narrative. Kalen realized that people outside could not see this side of life, and perhaps never would unless someone chose to show it. The thought planted a seed in him, one that quietly grew with each passing day. Maybe he could help the galaxy see the truth about his people. Despite the love at home, Kalen often felt the sting of misunderstanding. He recalled a moment when his parents traveled to a nearby system to trade goods. Other traders avoided them, some refusing to speak, others pretending not to notice them. Even when Kalen visited markets on his own, he felt the wary glances and the hushed whispers. Sometimes, he overheard questions like, "Are you sure it's safe to let them near our children? Or how do we know they won't betray us?" These words, meant for someone else, stung deeply. Kalen wondered how such misunderstanding could grow so strong. How could countless beings believe lies or exaggerations about a whole species? School life was equally challenging. Although his classmates were kind, they carried the influence of the galaxy's fear. Some would hesitate to play games with him, hesitant to include him in group activities. Others would repeat the stories they heard, sometimes thinking they were helping, not realizing the harm. Kalen learned to answer questions carefully, explaining gently when someone asked about the dangerous stories, but often he felt frustrated. It was exhausting to constantly explain who he truly was, only to be doubted. Yet, within these challenges, Kalen also found hope. He had friends who were open-minded, who listened when he shared real stories of life at home. He found strength in their willingness to understand. Every small act of trust from someone outside his species reminded him that not all beings were blinded by prejudice. These moments were rare, but they gave Kalen a sense of purpose. If even one person could see the truth, perhaps many others could too, one step at a time. At home, Kalen's parents supported him silently. They shared their own experiences, teaching him that every generation had the chance to shape perceptions. They reminded him that courage was not only about physical strength, but also about honesty, compassion, and the willingness to stand for truth, even when others doubted. Kalen began to internalize this lesson, understanding that changing minds would require patience, kindness, and action. One quiet evening, Kalen stood on a small hill overlooking the settlement, watching the twin moons rise in the sky. The stars twinkled far beyond, stretching across countless systems. He thought of the galaxy beyond, of all the beings who feared or hated his people without knowing them. The thought made him both sad and determined. If the universe would not come to understand them naturally, someone had to show them. Kalen made a promise to himself. He would live in a way that reflected the truth of his people. He would act with kindness, bravery, and honesty even when no one was watching. And someday, he would help others see the real story of their species. The nights on the homeworld were peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of nature and life continuing quietly. Kalen returned home, feeling a sense of connection to his community and a growing purpose for the future. Life at home was ordinary, yes, but in its ordinariness, it held extraordinary meaning. Every meal shared, every hand lent in help, every lesson taught with patience was a small rebellion against the galaxy's misconceptions. These small acts were quiet proof that his species was far more than the legends of fear portrayed elsewhere. As he drifted off to sleep that night, Kalen felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for the misunderstanding that had spread across the stars, hope for the possibility of change. He understood that the road ahead would not be easy. Convincing billions of beings to rethink their long-held beliefs would take more than words. It would take deeds, courage, and persistence. But Kalen was ready to begin. And in that quiet, ordinary home on a peaceful world, the first steps toward changing the galaxy's mind began to take shape. Kalen had grown up seeing the contrast between life at home and the galaxy's perception of his species. Yet, nothing prepared him for the first time he traveled off-world on his own. He was now older, more aware, and curious about the universe beyond his homeworld. The opportunity came when he was invited to help transport essential goods to a distant system, a simple job for someone of his age, yet one that meant leaving the comfort of his familiar world behind. As the spacecraft left the orbit of his planet, Kalen felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He looked out of the window at the shrinking blue and green globe below, thinking of his family, his friends, and the quiet streets of home. Beyond the stars awaited worlds where his species was feared, sometimes even hated. He knew that his first encounter with prejudice would likely come sooner or later, but he hoped it would be only whispers, nothing harmful. Upon arriving at the bustling trade hub of the neighboring system, Kalen immediately noticed the tension. Merchants moved quickly through crowded marketplaces while travelers from countless species haggled, bartered, and exchanged goods. The hub was alive with color, sound, and energy, but there was also an undercurrent of suspicion. He quickly learned why. The moment he stepped forward to negotiate the trade, a seasoned trader named Varn recoiled. His eyes widened with a mixture of fear and distrust, and he stepped back, shaking his head. I cannot trade with you, Varn said, his voice firm. You're kind, your species, and it's too risky. Kalen paused, taken aback. He had expected hesitation, perhaps skepticism, but not outright refusal. He tried to explain politely. We are here to deliver supplies. I assure you I mean no harm. My people. But Varn cut him off, waving a dismissive hand. I've heard enough. Your species is known for trouble. I won't risk my goods on you. The rejection stung sharply. Kalen had spent years observing kindness and cooperation in his homeworld. Yet here, a single label erased all of it. He felt the frustration that had been growing inside him since childhood, a mix of sadness, anger, and determination. Instead of retreating, he decided to try another approach. He politely asked Varn to at least hear him out, hoping that patience and reason could overcome fear. While Varn refused, not all encounters were negative. Kalen noticed a young trader from a distant system watching quietly. Unlike Varn, she seemed curious, even open. Her name was Lyra, and she worked in a small stall selling textiles from her homeworld. Unlike others who avoided him, she smiled and offered a gentle greeting. "Hello," she said. "I don't know much about your species. Can you tell me more?" Kalen hesitated. He had always been careful about who he trusted, but Lyra's tone was sincere, free from judgment. He decided to speak openly, describing life on his homeworld, the daily routines, the way families cared for one another, the acts of kindness that went unnoticed outside. He shared stories of neighbors helping during storms, children learning from elders, community supporting each other when resources were low. Lyra listened intently, her eyes wide with interest. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. I had no idea. For the first time, Kalen felt a spark of hope. Not everyone in the galaxy believed the negative stories. Some beings were willing to listen, to see beyond prejudice, and to recognize the truth. He realized that if even a few could be shown the reality of his species, perhaps a larger change could begin. The days that followed were a mixture of challenge and revelation. Kalen continued his work, often facing skepticism from traders, travelers, and officials. Many would speak to him politely enough, but their eyes betrayed doubt. Others refused to engage at all. Yet with each encounter, he also discovered allies, beings who were curious, kind, or simply willing to question what they had been told. They asked questions, listened to stories, and observed him acting with integrity. Through these interactions, Kalen began to notice something important. Fear and prejudice were not always born of personal experience, they were often inherited. Species that had never interacted with his kind still believed the worst because stories had been passed down, unchallenged, for generations. It was a hard truth, but it explained why changing perceptions would be difficult. Knowledge and experience were the only ways to break the cycle. One incident left a lasting impression on Kalen. A small child from another species wandered into the busy marketplace, lost and crying. The adults nearby froze, unsure how to respond. Kalen knelt beside the child, speaking softly and offering comfort. The child clung to him, and he guided them to the nearest official who could reunite them with their parents. Witnessing this simple act, Lyra nodded in approval, saying, "See? Not all stories are true. You showed kindness when it mattered most." This event reinforced Kalen's belief that actions spoke louder than rumors. If even a few beings could witness the reality of his species, they might tell others. Slowly, he began documenting each act of compassion, courage, and integrity he observed, both among his people and in his own actions. These stories, he hoped, would one day challenge the false narratives of fear and hatred. Yet Kalen also faced moments of doubt. Each time he encountered rejection or suspicion, it weighed heavily on him. He wondered whether his efforts could ever make a difference. Some days were harder than others, filled with quiet frustration and the loneliness of being judged for something beyond his control. But even on those days, he remembered the warmth of his homeworld, the love of his family, and the small victories, like the gratitude of a child, a kind word from a traveler, or the curiosity of someone like Lyra. Through it all, Kalen began to develop a strategy. He realized that changing minds would not happen in a single encounter. It would require patience, persistence, and consistency. He would have to act with honesty and integrity in every interaction, proving through deeds, not words alone, that his species was capable of goodness. And perhaps if enough beings witnessed this, the galaxy might slowly begin to see the truth. By the time Kalen prepared to return home, he had learned valuable lessons. Prejudice was widespread and deeply rooted, but it was not absolute. Kindness, courage, and honesty could break barriers, even if only a little at a time. And most importantly, he understood that change began with individual choices. Every act of goodness, no matter how small, was a step toward altering the galaxy's perception. As the spacecraft lifted off from the busy hub, Kalen looked out at the stars stretching endlessly before him, He thought of all the systems where his species was feared and misunderstood. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he now had a clearer sense of purpose. He was determined to show the galaxy the truth, not through words alone, but through actions, compassion, and the quiet heroism that existed in every corner of his world. Kalen returned home carrying more than supplies. He carried hope. He knew that his homeworld's ordinary acts of kindness could, one day, ripple across the stars and change hearts. The experience had been difficult, but it was also empowering. For the first time, he felt that the story of his species could begin to shift not through arguments or lectures, but through real, undeniable proof of goodness. And in that realization, Kalen found the courage to continue, knowing that the first step toward understanding was always the hardest, but also the most important. After returning home, Kalen felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey to the distant system had shown him the deep prejudice that existed against his species, but it had also revealed that understanding could be achieved. He began to talk with elders and leaders in his community, sharing what he had seen and learned. Together, they realized that the galaxy needed more than words. They needed action. Not long after, a crisis arose in a neighboring system. A sudden series of storms and seismic activity struck multiple planets at once. Buildings collapsed, power grids failed, and thousands of lives were at risk. News broadcasts from the affected systems were filled with desperation, calling for help from every capable species. However, many officials assumed that only certain trusted species could respond effectively. The name of Kalen's species, as usual, was met with doubt and hesitation. Kalen saw this as an opportunity. He gathered a team of volunteers from his species, individuals known for their skills in medicine, construction, and logistics. They trained together, shared strategies, and prepared to leave immediately. Even within their own community, some were nervous. They understood how the galaxy perceived them. But Kalen's determination inspired confidence, and soon the team was ready to embark on a mission that would challenge centuries of prejudice. The journey to the crisis zones was long and difficult. The team navigated through dangerous regions of space, where storms and debris threatened their spacecraft. Along the way, they encountered other species who doubted their intentions. Some ships refused them docking privileges, while others demanded proof of their abilities. Kalen remained calm and respectful, showing patience and professionalism at every turn. His team mirrored his behavior, demonstrating that they could act responsibly under pressure. Upon arrival, the devastation was far worse than any news report had conveyed. Entire cities were partially destroyed, with people trapped in collapsed buildings, injured or stranded on rooftops surrounded by floodwaters. The first response teams from other species were overwhelmed, moving slowly and carefully. Kalen's team immediately began organizing rescue operations. Using specialized equipment and knowledge passed down through generations, they navigated the dangerous zones with precision and care. One of the first rescues involved a group of children trapped in a partially collapsed school. While other teams hesitated, Kalen led his group through unstable debris, carefully clearing paths and lifting heavy beams. His team worked quickly but methodically, ensuring that each child was safely evacuated. The parents, initially wary of Kalen's species, watched in disbelief as their children were returned unharmed. Some could not believe that beings they had feared for generations were capable of such bravery and care. As the days passed, Kalen's team continued their work. They built temporary shelters, distributed food and water, and treated injuries with skill and compassion. Other species began to take notice. A few leaders approached Kalen, offering assistance and advice, but also admitting quietly that they had misjudged his species. Slowly, the narrative that had dominated the galaxy for so long began to shift in the presence of undeniable action. The team's efforts were not without challenges. Equipment sometimes failed, communication lines were disrupted, and dangerous conditions tested their limits. But each obstacle was met with teamwork, perseverance, and calm problem-solving. Kalen noticed something remarkable. His species did not become discouraged. Even when faced with setbacks, they continued to act selflessly, focusing on the lives at risk rather than on the prejudice around them. During one particularly dangerous rescue, a senior member of the team, known for her courage and skill, saved a family trapped in rising floodwaters. She guided them to safety with remarkable calm, earning the respect of everyone who witnessed the event. Messages of gratitude spread quickly, and news reporters began to cover the actions of Kaylin's team, noting the difference between reality and the long-standing rumors. Slowly, outsiders began to understand that the stories they had been told were incomplete or misleading. Kaylin also took the time to document the efforts of his species. He recorded rescue operations, interviewed survivors, and gathered testimonies of cooperation and bravery. These records were not intended as personal accolades, but as evidence of the truth. Each story highlighted acts of kindness, resilience, and courage, qualities that had been ignored or overlooked by the galaxy for generations. One evening, after a long day of rescue work, Kaylin stood on a hill overlooking a flood-affected city. The sun was setting, casting warm light over the damaged buildings and the makeshift shelters his team had helped erect. He thought about how far they had come, from being feared and shunned to being recognized for their actions. It was not complete acceptance, but it was a start. Even small changes in perception could grow over time, he realized, just as a single seed could eventually grow into a mighty tree. During this period, Kaylin also encountered other species who were willing to learn. Some came with skepticism, but after seeing his team act with integrity and care, they asked questions, observed practices, and even joined in efforts. Kaylin welcomed them, showing that collaboration was possible when trust and mutual respect were present. These moments became powerful examples of how understanding could replace prejudice. By the end of the relief efforts, Kaylin's team had saved thousands of lives, treated countless injuries, and provided hope to entire communities. Reports from survivors painted a very different picture than the one the galaxy had known for so long. These people spoke not of danger and cruelty, but of bravery, kindness, and dedication. The narrative was beginning to shift, slowly but surely, as real stories replaced rumor and fear. For Kaylin, this experience was life-changing. He saw clearly that prejudice could only be overcome through consistent action, courage, and compassion. Words alone were not enough. Proof was needed. And proof, he realized, was best delivered through deeds that directly benefited others. Every rescue, every meal delivered, every hand extended in help was a step toward rewriting the story of his species. Even as recognition grew, Kaylin remained humble. He knew that some would continue to doubt, and some would hold on to fear no matter what evidence was presented. But that did not deter him. He understood that the goal was not universal approval, but truth. Truth that could stand on its own, quietly and steadily, reshaping perceptions one act at a time. When Kaylin finally returned home after the long mission, he was welcomed as a hero, but he saw himself differently. He was not a hero for glory or recognition. He was simply someone who had chosen to act with integrity when it mattered most. And in that choice, he had begun to show the galaxy that his species was far more than the stories of fear and hatred suggested. The events of the crisis became the first true turning point in the perception of Kaylin's species. It was proof that their ordinary lives, filled with acts of care and cooperation, were not only real but valuable to the wider galaxy. The story that had been told for centuries, that they were dangerous and untrustworthy, was being challenged, slowly but inevitably, by the undeniable truth of their actions. And as Kaylin looked at the stars that night, he felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, he realized that change was possible. The galaxy had witnessed the courage, compassion, and reliability of his species. And while the journey to full understanding would be long, this mission had proved that even the most loathed species could rise above prejudice, showing their true nature through deeds, not words. After the crisis mission, Kaylin and his team returned home, carrying the quiet pride of lives saved and communities helped. Yet, the recognition they received was not universal. While many were grateful, there were powerful voices across the galaxy determined to maintain old prejudices. Propaganda campaigns emerged, spreading doubts about Kaylin's team and questioning their motives. Rumors claimed their actions had been staged, or that they were trying to manipulate other species. Kalen saw this as a predictable but painful reminder of how deeply prejudice could linger. Despite these challenges, Kalen remained resolute. He understood that changing minds would take more than a single heroic act. It required persistence and proof over time. He began traveling to nearby systems, offering aid wherever it was needed. His team assisted in rebuilding communities, providing medical help, and supporting those who had suffered natural disasters or economic hardships. Each act demonstrated that their intentions were genuine, their capabilities real, and their hearts. Kind resistance, however, came in subtle forms as well. Some species refused to interact with them directly, avoiding their presence in meetings, trade agreements, and public events. In more extreme cases, officials dismissed their efforts entirely, claiming they were unqualified or unsuitable. These barriers could have been discouraging, but Kalen approached them with patience. He realized that anger or frustration would only reinforce prejudice. Calm persistence was more powerful. By showing professionalism and empathy, he slowly dismantled misconceptions. The turning point came when a catastrophic flood struck a major colony in a heavily populated system. Immediate relief was needed, but bureaucratic leaders hesitated, uncertain whether to trust Kalen's species. He and his team acted quickly, coordinating rescue missions, distributing supplies, and treating the injured. Within days, they saved thousands of lives, earning public praise from the affected communities. Despite attempts to discredit them, the sheer scale of their contribution could not be ignored. Through these experiences, Kalen began to notice a pattern. Prejudice often thrived in the absence of first-hand knowledge. Beings who had witnessed their actions directly were more likely to recognize their true nature. This insight strengthened his resolve to lead by example, demonstrating compassion, bravery, and integrity in every possible situation. Slowly, word spread that Kalen's species could be trusted, and others began sharing their own observations, adding credibility to the truth. Even with progress, challenges remained. Some factions actively resisted, fearful of changing old narratives or losing political leverage. Kalen faced verbal attacks, criticism in interstellar forums, and the dismissal of his species' achievements. But he also found allies, open-minded, beings who encouraged him, provided platforms for his message, and amplified the stories of kindness and heroism. He realized that bridging understanding required both action and collaboration. By the time months had passed, Kalen's efforts had reshaped perceptions in many regions. Communities that once feared his species now sought their assistance, and interspecies partnerships grew. Yet he understood that complete acceptance was a long-term goal. Prejudice did not vanish overnight. It required continual demonstration of integrity and proof of character. Kalen embraced this challenge, confident that persistent goodness could eventually outweigh generations of falsehoods. As he looked across a meeting hall filled with representatives from diverse species, Kalen reflected on how far they had come. The journey had been difficult, filled with rejection, skepticism, and obstacles, yet progress was evident. A dialogue had begun, a tentative recognition that his species was capable of compassion, courage, and reliability. And for Kalen, this was more important than accolades or fame. It was the beginning of a legacy of understanding. The years that followed were a testament to perseverance and truth. Kalen's species, once universally feared and loathed, gradually began to be seen in a different light. Young members grew up with confidence, knowing that their identity did not define them by outdated stereotypes. Communities across the galaxy now had tangible examples of their contributions, lives saved, conflicts mediated, and hardships alleviated. The perception that had taken centuries to form was slowly being rewritten. Kalen continued his efforts, traveling to distant systems, building bridges between species, and mentoring younger members of his own community. He taught them the importance of patience, empathy, and consistent action. Every small act of kindness, every effort to assist others, became a building block in the larger mission of reshaping the galaxy's understanding. One day, Kalen received a message from a system he had helped years earlier. The leaders expressed gratitude, noting that their citizens now respected and trusted his species. They shared how the stories of his team had inspired cooperation and understanding among younger generations. Kalen felt a quiet satisfaction. These tangible results, small yet significant, reinforced that his mission was succeeding. Recognition continued to grow, but not without reminders of the challenges that remained. Some beings continued to cling to fear, distrust, or old biases. Kalen accepted this reality, knowing that perfection was neither possible nor necessary. The goal was understanding, not universal approval. Every life positively impacted, every bridge built between species was a success. Through it all, Kalen remained humble. He understood that the story of his species was not about individual glory, but about collective truth. It was a story of ordinary beings acting with courage and kindness, challenging misconceptions with consistent proof. It was a story of perseverance, patience, and the quiet power of good deeds. As Kalen walked through his homeworld, he observed children playing, families sharing meals, and neighbors helping one another. He smiled, realizing that these ordinary acts were extraordinary in their ability to change perceptions. Across the galaxy, the ripple effect of their actions was visible. Misunderstandings were slowly replaced with recognition, fear with respect, and prejudice with curiosity. Finally, Kalen understood the depth of his journey. From a young being who witnessed the unfair fear of his species to a leader shaping the galaxy's perception, he had learned that truth was strongest when demonstrated through action. Stories could mislead, rumors could distort, but deeds endured. Every life touched by kindness, every act of courage, every demonstration of integrity contributed to a legacy of understanding. The galaxy had begun to see that his species was not what the rumors claimed. They were capable of compassion, bravery, and cooperation. The journey was far from over, but the first steps toward genuine understanding had been taken. Kalen knew that future generations would continue the work, strengthening relationships, building trust, and proving that even the most loathed species could rise above prejudice. As the stars shone above his homeworld, Kalen felt a sense of peace. His mission was no longer just his own. It was a movement, a growing recognition of truth and justice across countless systems. The galaxy was beginning to change, slowly but surely, and Kalen knew that the legacy of his species would be remembered, not for fear or hatred, but for the quiet power of deeds, integrity, and unwavering compassion.